Hi, this is the voice of Heidie Calero with another fascinating economic capsule on the Puerto Rico economy. Today we're going to talk about the big shift in Puerto Rico's labor market, which is really a reflection of what is happening in the States with the big resignation, the problem that you do not find enough workers. And is it true that workers do not want to work? Or is it that certain workers do not want to return to the labor force or to return to jobs that were paying minimum wage? And the States is not only the only one with a big resignation. This is happening globally, and we know right now that in China, again with the Omicron, they are now closing in Beijing, in Shanghai. Well, it's problems on a global scale, but let's focus in on Puerto Rico. Don't forget, those of you who like our economic capsules, to go to YouTube, subscribe, and to the voice of Heidie Calero, and give us a like. The more likes we have, the better it is, and I can share with you more topics in the voice of Heidie Calero. Well, coming back to our first graph that I'm depicting here, it's trends in the labor force, and we have shown here what has been happening during the past 3 decades, 1990 through 2020 in Puerto Rico. And the column that is in color purple is the civil population. That's the civilian population. That is the working age population, 16 years and older. Out of that working age population comes the labor force, which is in green, the column that is in green. And that is made up of the employed plus the unemployed. That is what constitutes labor force. And finally, those that are outside the labor force is the difference between the civilian workforce of 16 years and over and those that are really participating in the labor market. So that's the blue column. So in 1990, what you see there compared with what happened in 2020, what we are seeing is that the labor force has been declining. Especially in 2010, it was 1.3 million people. In 2020, it's 1.1 million people. And notice that it is the same difference that you see in the civilian working age population, from 2.9 million in 2010 to 2.7 million. So that difference of 200,000, where is it coming from? It's reflected in the labor force. And those that are outside the labor force are continued more or less stable, 1.6 million. But the real difference has been in the civilian working age population. And that is all a result of all these demographic turmoil that is happening. Puerto Rico's population is not only falling or reducing, but it is aging. And that is it's going to be reflected in the working age. Let's look then at the next graph. All that I showed you before, now it's depicted in the shift in labor participation rate, which is really those that are participating. That is the labor force, those employed plus the unemployed as a percentage of the civilian working age population. And notice that in 2006, more or less, just before pre-recession levels in Puerto Rico, it was 48.9%, close to 50%. Now, as of 2021, it's 42.7%, close to 43%. So it is a lower participation rate. We have not returned to pre-recession levels. And that has important ramifications because either Puerto Rico's underground economy is huge, or people are just not encouraged to look for a job that they are not either happy with what they would be doing, or they're not very happy with what they would be receiving in terms of wages. But overall, although the participation rate has been declining, we are focusing on what is happening in employment. And notice how interesting this third graph that I'm depicting for you, and this is on a monthly basis from January 2020 through January of 2022, which is more or less the latest figures that we have. and it indicates the partial employment, those that work less 35 or less hours per week. It's the columns that are in the mustard color. They have been more or less constant, about 20% of total employment, except for the pandemic, which as you have heard me before, it started in March of 2020 when Puerto Rico's economy was closed down, it was on a lockdown, and it continued like that, more or less peaking just about May, June of 2020. And notice that during that period, because total employment declined, but partial employment kept more or less moving along those lines in the labor market, and they grew up to 79%. And what you see thereafter is that it's 20%. So of that total employment, 20% is partial employment. Can you imagine if not only we had more than 50% in participation rate, and we had all those partial jobs translating into full-time jobs, what would be the result in terms of economic growth in this country? It would be absolutely wonderful. Well, it's after the pandemic, we are seeing not only the partial employment that we see there in this graph, but in the next graph, we are also seeing even the disabled coming into the workforce. That's probably a result of all these unemployment benefits being eliminated or reduced once again to prior pandemic levels, or that they really don't see the CARES Act because of the benefits of the pandemic also being reduced or eliminated, and that now they need to really compensate for what is happening in terms of inflation, which is already rising not only in Puerto Rico but globally. So it's interesting that as of more or less February of 2022, we saw almost 59,000 those who were classified as disabled entering the workforce because they suddenly disappeared and they were no longer incapacitated or disabled. So it's an interesting trend that you see there. And the final graph is what is happening in all this inflationary spiral, in all these labor trends, what is happening with wages. And this is interesting because it is really a big challenge that we face not only currently, but going forward. And that is whether wages are really following productivity or they are at odds with productivity, which really should be the basis, not inflation, should be the basis for wage increases. And as you can see here, the blue line is productivity as measured by the Puerto Rico Planning Board. This is on an annual basis. We do not have hourly productivity as they have in the States, but at least it gives you an idea. And the wages increase, it's what you see there is the sort of the purple line that you see there. Notice that when wages are up, it seems that productivity is down. So it should not be that way. It should be like a positive correlation. Productivity increases, wages should also follow. And we do not have a real important correlation here in terms of wages. So we are at odds in productivity. A big challenge moving ahead. If you liked our economic capsule, don't forget to give us a like. And remember, the economy is all of us. Thank you.